Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. This is Ben Crosby talking about the K-3 assessment pilot for 2013-14. Stay tuned. This is about a 10-minute video that is going to give a broad overview of where we started with this work in K2 last year and how we hope to expand the pilot for the coming year. So I want to start by talking about our goals. So we have two broad goals, and they're listed here in order of importance. The first goal is to basically make sure that we're going out and finding high quality tools that we can give to teachers that are really going to help them accelerate student learning in K3. So again, I cannot emphasize enough that we're not just testing for the sake of testing. We are going out and trying to find tools that are really going to help you improve your practice and accelerate student learning for all kids in your classroom. The second piece of this is, of course, to find a valid and reliable way for K-3 teachers to demonstrate the impact that they have on student growth. So that is to basically give a significant portion of our teachers the ability to sort of demonstrate the influence that they have on student learning over the course of the year. So here's some background in this work. Last fall, about a year ago, we sent a survey out to K2 teachers about their preferences for measuring student growth. And we had 66 teachers out of about 180 respond, so that's about a third. And 80% of those teachers that did respond indicated that they would rather have some growth measure other than school or Aspire-wide. That is, they wanted their own measure for student learning in their classrooms. And on top of this, we also asked folks basically which assessment would you rather that we sort of focus on if we were to move away from school-wide or Aspire-wide. And here's what K2 teachers said. About half of them indicated that they would be interested in some sort of internal measure that we were already using, DRA or DIBELS. About 30% of them said that they'd be interested in looking at some sort of CST similar measure like a bubble test. And about 20% said that they would be interested in some sort of adaptive assessment, something online, something that was new and that we hadn't really seen before. All right, so based off that feedback, we basically went out and researched as many different test options as we could find at the time that met two criteria. The first was that it had to be a proven high-quality test that had been vetted. So we went out and we looked for tests that other districts had used, that other CMOs had used, basically that we knew were high-quality instruments that had been tested beforehand. And the second thing was that it needed to have a large national sample so that we could calculate relative growth, i.e. there were lots of other test occasions that we could compare our students against so that we could get a sense for how students were growing over time. So in our research, we went out and we found many tests. The first was SAT-10, basically a classic bubble test, reading and math, 50 questions each. The second option was AIMSweb, which is also made by Pearson. This is a teacher-administered assessment that is given one-on-one using an iPad. The next option was MAP, which is made by NWEA. This is an adaptive assessment that each student takes on a laptop. There are headphones that sort of have an audio guide that leads each student through the assessment, and the questions adapt to your skill level. And then the last was DRA, and this is obviously already part of our practice. So we went out and got feedback from coaches and from teachers, and we looked at these tests, and we ended up ruling out SAT-10 because it wasn't appropriate to give a 50-question bubble test to a kindergartner. And we also ruled out DRA because at the time we didn't have a larger sample available, and so we weren't sure how we would sort of calculate relative growth over time using DRA. So we went forward with this pilot of both MAP and AIMSweb. We had 24 teachers sign up in K2 across all three regions, about 550 students. And here's basically what we learned. We found that on both tests, there was a very high correlation between MAP and AIMSweb and the DRA and math benchmarks. That is, students who scored high on MAP or AIMSweb also tended to score high on DRA and math benchmarks, and students who scored low on the math benchmarks or on DRA also tended to score low on MAP and AIMSweb. The bottom line was that all these tests were basically telling the same story about student learning. After the winter, though, we got feedback from AIMSweb teachers basically saying it took way too long to administer this test. Some teachers had to get subs. It just ended up being way too much of a hit on instructional time, and so we ended up dropping it. As a result, we sort of kept map on the table, but we knew that AIMSweb wasn't really a viable option going forward. But I have to say that the biggest learning in this was really something that we knew all along, which was that for younger students, especially in K1, any assessment has to be either highly engaging, like the map test. It has to have headphones and some sort of like auditory cues, and there's some sort of guide for you on the screen. Or it has to be teacher administered. It has to be one of these two things, which is sort of why we picked MAP and AIMSweb originally. So last spring we came back and we said, okay, AIMSweb didn't work out because it was too much of a hit on time. Let's put DRA back on the table. Now, why is this? If we are going to go forward with some sort of teacher administered test, why not go with the one that's already part of our program? All of our schools already use it. We already know the test. We know it's high quality. It ties into all of these things that we already do with, guided reading, etc. And we know it's not going anywhere. So let's see if we could use this to measure growth. So we had MAP and DRA was back on the table. And this brings us to the moment you've all been waiting for. How are we expanding the pilot for 2013-14? So this year we are going to pilot 3 tests. The first is MAP, which we did last year. Again, this is adaptive. It is on a laptop. It has headphones. It sort of guides you through the test in both math and reading. The second is STAR Enterprise. This is made by the same folks who make Accelerated Reader. And again, this is also adaptive. It's a little bit shorter than MAP, and the items are more like a regular, bubble test, but it's sort of quicker to give. And the last test that we're going to pilot is, again, DRA. As I mentioned, it is back on the table. All right, so let's now move on and think about what questions that we want the pilot to answer. So first, let's go back and just think about our goals. So our first goal, as you remember, was to find a diagnostic tool that really drove instruction. And the second was to see if we could find some sort of valid and reliable growth measure. And obviously, these sort of go hand in hand, but I just want to point out that we are still very focused on the first goal before we move on to the second. So let's go into the actual assessments now. Our guiding questions for MAP for Primary and STAR Enterprise are very similar. They're basically, are each of these tests good instructional tools? How helpful is the data that you get out of the actual assessments in terms of helping you plan instruction, plan small groups, plan intervention, and then know whether or not your teaching has had an impact? Have your lessons stuck? The second piece is, of course, how validly and reliably do each of these measures capture student growth? i.e., are these measures capturing the sort of learning that we are hoping to elicit or bring about in our students? And are they capturing that learning in the same way that other assessments that we use also capture it? i.e., are they capturing the same sort of learning as DRA, as math benchmarks, or as other assessments that you may be using already in your classroom? With DRA, obviously, I think that we know that the DRA is a good instructional tool already. We all use it, we all know it, and so instead, the focus with the DRA is really more on, are we able to norm and align ourselves both within and between schools? That is, can we say that a DRA given in one school is sort of similar enough to the way that that DRA would be given in another school, so that we can basically say that the DRA is a reliable growth measure and then tie that to effectiveness ratings? That is a big question, and one that we hope to answer over the course of this year. All right, so now let's move on and think about some of the responsibilities of pilot teachers. So pilot teachers, the first thing to do is that you will attend a one-day training at the home office to really go deep and learn about your individual assessment. So we will fly you, drive you, whatever it is to get you up to the home office, train you, and then send you back out so that you could administer these assessments during the fall and the spring with, of course, ongoing support from home office and from coaches. And then we're going to ask you to use, or at least try to use, the assessment data in your own teaching. So look at the data, try to make sense of it, see if it's actually relevant to your own practice, and figure out ways that you might use it. I think that this is the most important piece of the work personally, is trying to make sense of the data. After that, obviously in the spring, in June, we are going to come back together and we're going to have to basically figure out how we want to move forward for 2014-15. Which of these assessments do we feel like is the most appropriate option for both driving instruction and measuring growth in K-3? And then once that assessment is chosen, we're going to ask you to help in actually rolling that out to other teachers and sort of assisting us in talking about why we chose one assessment over the other. All right, let's move on and talk about compensation. So $750 for the year, plus the option to opt out of certain other assessments. And there's, one more thing on here that isn't actually on the screen, but I just want to mention it. This is really your opportunity to drive this work, to sort of give thoughtful leadership as to how we should move forward in both measuring growth, but then assessment and tools more generally in K3. And I think that's a really cool thing, and I really hope that you will take part in it. So here are some questions that you may be thinking in your head. The participation goal, so we hope to get 12 to 15 K3 thought leaders by region, and then basically, split them evenly by assessment by region, so that everyone has a sort of equal share of assessments within your area. The second question is, why should I participate? And here's the reason: because we really value your ongoing leadership in this work. This is really your chance, as I mentioned, to set Aspire a policy as to how we identify and support really great teaching in K3, and we really can't do it without you. This has to be something that comes from the ground up, that actually comes from schools, and this is your chance to actually do that. All right, last question. Will I get to choose the assessment I pilot? The answer is that we will ask for your preference when you actually sign up, but we may ask you to pilot a different assessment just so we can balance the actual test groups. We don't want to have one assessment that has way more teachers than the other, so as a result, we may ask you to pilot an assessment that you did not initially sign up for. So next steps, a survey is going to follow this webinar. Please sign up for the pilot and send us your feedback and questions either to me or to your area soup. And the last thing is that I think that we all just want to say a really big thank you for your ongoing engagement in this work. It's really great to have you on board, and we really value all of your thoughts. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Please, as I said, be in touch with any questions or comments. And that's it. Take care, everyone.